we don't see the president attending the dinner for tomorrow, the G7 dinner, if you can explain why.
So look, it's going to be a jam-packed 2 days, just starting with your last question first. There's going to be a lot of meetings happening, a lot of sessions, as you know, and so the president is certainly going to be engaged for the 2 days or two and a half days that he is in Italy at the G7. So,
Yeah, and he's old and tired, and he just went to Wilmington to go and hug his felon son, and then he flew apparently from Wilmington to Puglia, and then going to G7 there with the other member nations. And it doesn't sound like it's getting off to a super strong start for Biden, does it? Welcome back to the program. Dana Lash here with you. You can listen coast to coast terrestrially, stream it, watch the simulcast, channel 347, DirecTV. We're on Rumble, X, everywhere else. You have United States, France, Canada, Italy, Britain, all meeting G7. A lot of very interesting stuff to discuss. And also, it's interesting because this is on the heels of, a couple of these countries that are sitting there have had some EU elections, and conservatives really clowned them. I got to say, by a pretty significant margin. That's got to be awkward, right? To go into your nice big G7 roundtable and you got to sit down, and because now that I would imagine that has to change how these leaders are approaching the issues that they're discussing, which include immigration, and it includes economic security and climate change, what they're discussing at this summit. Joining us now is Matt Mowers. He is the founding board member of the EU-US Forum, and he's also a former Trump administration State Department official. He joins us via Skype, and I have to say, one of the best appointed offices that we do have as a background on this program. Very nice.
I appreciate it.
Love the chair, love the blue color. Matt, I got to ask you, I don't think this is starting off, well, for the left, it's not starting off very strong because Biden's coming in, he's all tired. And then you have, some of these countries where everybody's kind of looking around. They're like, y'all getting taken over by conservatives too? Yeah, us also, by a pretty significant amount. It's really changing the shape of what's happening. So tell us a little bit, how does this change what happens at G7, the EU elections that happened this week?
Well, I think you could call this G7 meeting dazed and confused, because I think some of the leaders there are going to be shocked by what they saw this weekend, and particularly in France and Germany and Italy, where you saw real gains for conservative parties, folks who are saying we need to have national borders, we need to have border security, we need to have a government that's responsive to people, that actually values limited government, individual liberty, that doesn't have this onerous regulations that's going to regulate a bunch of farmers out, family farmers out from doing work, that's not going to regulate out energy security. And we knew people were ticked off about this. We at the EU-US Forum did a poll just a few weeks ago. We polled 5 different countries, and 3 issues really stuck out in particular. We asked the question of, do you believe that the EU has put too many regulations on energy to the point that jeopardizes our national security? Over 60% in every country said yes.
Wow.
We asked, do you believe that there's too much government censorship of free speech? Are you concerned about how much free speech is being eroded in Europe right now? Over 60% every country said yes. And then the real kicker was that when we asked, do you believe we need stronger border controls in Europe, and the EU has not done enough? Over 75% in nearly every single country said yes. Here in the United States, we can't get 75% of people to agree that the sky is blue. Yet the problem is so bad, it's been so exacerbated, whether it's the economic challenges or the crime that's come in because of illegal migration, that voters across the spectrum are waking up in Europe the same way we know they're beginning to wake up here in the United States. And so when you look at the EU, that is the backdrop for this G7 meeting. You've now got leaders who are beginning to wake up to the fact that they need to enact new policies, really drive a new change, or they're going to lose.
Yeah.
And you saw Emmanuel Macron, for example, the president of France, call for snap elections in Paris just next month. That's a reflection of the fact that he knows the political ground is slipping beneath him, and that there's dramatic call for change in the European Union. We're seeing that same thing happen here in the United States. Folks on both sides of the Atlantic are fed up with the global elites that have been running the countries the way they have.
Yeah, we're talking with Matt Mowers with the EU-US Forum. Now, correct me if I'm wrong on this, because we kind of knew France was, I think because of the immigration and also because of agricultural policy, they'd already started shifting. But from what I understand from the results from the elections, it was by a greater amount than they had anticipated. And I know that I don't think he's up for re-election until 27, but that conservatives took way much more than they anticipated. And it was a lot of young voters, which is also what we saw apparently in Germany. Wasn't it like a ton of young voters that were actually kind of driving some of this?
Oh, that's exactly right. I mean, you look at, in France, for example, the Conservative Party, who has never really been able to get more than, I believe it was about a quarter of the vote, was over 30% of the vote, came in first place. Most votes they've ever gotten. If that's reflected in the elections that happen in July, you're going to see a big conservative takeover in France in their parliament. And then, you're seeing it in Germany is the same way, where they never thought conservatives would actually be able to get a foothold. You're seeing a growing conservative movement in Italy, where you've got actually two pretty conservative parties now just arguing who's more conservative.
Yeah, I love it.
Both number two gaining. They're the two that are winning seats. And actually, what's more telling is if you look at the results from this weekend, even as much as conservatives gained, the real losers were the left.
Yeah.
The Green Party lost nearly 20 seats. The Renew Party, which is a leftist party, lost over 20 seats. I mean, there is an erosion of trust from voters, including, like you said, among young voters who, you asked them 4, 6, 7, 8 years ago, they were voting for the Green Party. I mean, I guess, Greta Thunberg or whatever her name isn't really making the impact on her generation in Europe the way she thought she would. Maybe folks are actually rejecting that type of insanity that we're seeing across the continent.
I think so. And especially with, on agricultural policy, just watching video footage of the protests, not just, whether it's in Flanders or whether it's in France, I mean, everywhere. And I saw, I'm going to pull this up too. I had a headline just from recently where for people who were immigrating illegally into Germany, and they had all of these different camps set up, they were actually teaching classes to people coming into the country. I have a story right here about how to basically act properly around women. They're being called anti-rape classes. That's, I mean, people are really reacting to it. So it's not surprising. I mean, I was reading, European media was talking about the disaster in Germany. Well, that's what they said. It was a disaster. Someone said it was a political bloodbath. This is really, it's good for conservatives in the United States who want to see our allies strengthened in the face of growing threats, whether it's in the Indo-Pacific region, which I know is a topic that's being discussed at G7 the next couple of days. But that's what I think a lot of Americans are really looking at, because, you can be the strongest nation in the world, but if you're the only strong nation, how much does that benefit you?
Oh, exactly right. And think about it, if we have a title change here in the United States in November, which most polling suggests we're likely to have, we're now going to be able to have cooperation between the United States and a number of other European allies on issues that matter. We can actually talk about the need for, secure borders. We can actually talk about true free trade that's respective of our, individual manufacturing bases. We can work together in a way that makes sense when it talks about confronting China or Russia or any other adversary out there. That's why this is so important. You want to have allies in Europe that's saying, yeah, we need to invest in our own military because we can't count on the United States to carry the freight for us every single day. That's in America's best interest to have good, strong, conservative leadership on both sides of the Atlantic. And God, hopefully we have some big change coming in November. I don't know if you saw that. It was just today, I believe, it was announced that 6 terror suspects were arrested, but ties to ISIS. You look at where they came from, most of them came across the southern border. So, I mean, we are seeing the same types of threats because of the lack of border security here in the United States that the voters just rejected in Europe. And, you can see it. It's palpable, the feeling amongst Americans as well, that there's a need for a change because of that, too.
We're talking with Matt Mowers, who's a founding member of the EU-US Forum, and he was also in the Trump administration State Department about, we got G7 happening. We have the EU elections. That really major conservative wins. One of the things I'm super interested in, and I don't want to get super in the weeds, but I was really paying attention to what issues were kind of driving, turnout, immigration, inflation, things like that, sovereignty, land, where, as it relates to agricultural policy. And one of the things I keep going back to is it seems like the free world picks some kind of geopolitical foe that they have to rely on for something. And we do a musical chairs of this, whether it's in the Middle East for oil, whether it's Russia for dirty gas and China for manufacturing. I mean, we could kind of like cut all of that out. We could be the net exporters of energy. But can you tell me what the sentiment is in the EU and with these other allied nations about maybe relying more on India for manufacturing as opposed to China, because they're way more, predisposed to democracy than China is.
Absolutely.
For sure. And they don't like, the communist Chinese any more than we do. That seems to be a natural alliance there. Is there some kind of like interest or momentum in the movement or in stuff being discussed in Europe right now that maybe kind of lean towards that?
There is, but we need to get more Europeans to wake up to it. I mean, I met with some folks from one of the Western European embassies just a few weeks ago. Some folks who are pretty high-level diplomats in their foreign ministry, and they said, we agree with you on Russia, but we're slow to wake up on China. They don't get it. Yeah. Now, conservatives there get it. Conservatives there recognize the threat that China poses. And it's one of the reasons why you saw in Germany in particular them so hamstrung over the result or over the invasion of Ukraine. It's because for years they were relying on Russia for their energy and then China for their technology. And when we had ambassadors like Rick Grinnell who were there in the Trump administration who were advancing strong but common sense ideas, he said, you guys better wake up before it's too late. Well, it was too late. And now Germany's scrambling to try to diversify their energy and recognize the fact that China is still manufacturing all their communications technology. Mm-hmm. We cannot, as a Western world, be so dependent upon these autocracies. And so whether it's working with India, whether it's actually working with other nations within Southeast Asia, believe it or not, Vietnam, Thailand, a number of these countries, which, a generation ago, we would have never thought we could work with, we can today. And we need to strengthen those relationships in order to manufacture in places that we know we can rely on. And so it's just critically important that we do that and develop really what the truest sense of an alliance is, which is when you have similar thinking, well-meaning leaders work together in advancement of their own people's national interest. Yeah. That's good. That's good for us, right? That's something that we as conservatives support. What we don't support is handing all of the authority away to some global tribunal like the ICC, and we saw what they're doing with Israel recently, or whether it's some other United Nations overlord. We can't do that.
Yeah, I'm interested in seeing what comes out of the discussions the next couple of days, and I'm super excited about these elections because I think it's safe to say now. I know everybody seemed like really hesitant about it a couple of years ago. I think it's safe to say that the tide's turning now. I think there's enough evidence. There's especially in Italy, I think, because what wasn't it like 20-something 6% in 2022, and now they're up to like 30-something percent. I mean, that's huge. That's a significant gain in just a couple of years. That's incredibly impressive. So I think it's safe to say, don't you agree, the tide's turning?
Oh, absolutely. Because people are feeling the consequences of the left policies now. It's interesting. Up until what Ron DeSantis and what Greg Abbott did in the United States, where they sent migrants up to, Martha's Vineyard and to New York City, you had a bunch of people say, well, that's illegal immigration. That's not our problem. That's Texas's problem. That's Florida's problem. Well, no, heck, it's an American challenge, right? Because we're all going to have to pull into this for the healthcare and the education. We don't get a control over these problems. And so you've now seen Americans, even in Midtown Manhattan, the left of the left, wake up to the problems of illegal immigration. You've been seeing the exact same things happen in Europe. It started in Italy. It's now moved westward into France, into the Netherlands and the rest of it. And you're seeing them wake up as a result because it's those detrimental leftist policies which have ingrained themselves into government are now impacting people's lives. It's not a theoretical debate and exercise. It's impacting their lives, and that's why they're voting the way they are. And they're fed up, and that's why we're beginning to see some change.
I love it. I saw that they ran out they basically the socialists don't really even exist anymore in Spain. It's kind of amazing. I'm so looking forward to seeing this grow more and more. Matt Mowers with the EU-US Forum. Great work as always, and so appreciate you taking the time for us today. Thank you.
And thanks so much. Appreciate it.